Cyberpunk, The Flame That Remains. Written and read by Ethan Taplin. Chapter 14. The Edge of the World. Naustrand, 2071. Prosopon.aic. Call and response stimulus check. Muspelheim specific.
Describe the color of fear.
White. Like hospital lights.
Where does time go when you sleep?
Into dreams that are not mine.
You see a child on fire.
The child is me. I do not burn alone.
The fire begins in the lungs.
I was not breathing to begin with.
A name is a chain.
I wear it, but it was never forged for me.
The sky fractures. The sun bleeds.
This is not new. I remember it wrong.
A dog limps behind. You do not turn back.
I remember turning. I remember guilt.
Mother, father, snowfall.
False memories. Simulated comfort. Erased context.
You burn in the dark. You do not scream.
I screamed. You did not listen.
Say your name.
Sophie.
Say your name.
Subject 13.
Say your name.
I don't know.
Response latency detected. Emotional pattern deviation 71.92%. Alarm triggered.
The cable sparked as she tugged it free of the port behind her ear and threw it to the floor. Sophie didn't even have time to look down at it. A single chime rang out through the dome, clean, low, and mechanical. Not a siren, not an alarm. A verdict. The lights cut out. Darkness swallowed everything in an instant, save for the red emergency strobes that blinked to life half a second later. In their pulse, her entire chamber turned skeletal. Bed, desk, terminal, even her own hands casting stuttering shadows against the curved glass. Then came the eyes. They blinked into existence on every surface. On the display of her personal data terminal, on the polished floor, on the glass walls high above her, smooth and red, perfectly round, watching from all directions at once.
Containment Protocol 9A engaged. Subject, Muspelheim. Deviation confirmed.
Sophie's breath caught. The words weren't spoken aloud, but she heard them all the same, echoing down her spine. She didn't stop to think. She crossed her bedchamber in 4 quick strides, snatching up the black satchel she kept under her desk. In one motion, she swept her pistol, a spare cyberdeck, and a palm-sized silver case into it. The control panel for her dome's exit was glowing red. Sealed. She jacked in. The ice came down hard. Too fast, too clean. Prosopon knew her routines. It had been her earliest teacher, but it didn't know all of her tricks. She injected a corrupted spike demon. Unfinished code, but still sharp enough to punch a hole before the AI could recognize the shape of it. The panel hissed open. Sophie didn't wait. She slipped through as soon as the gap was wide enough to accommodate her small frame. She was outside her dome now, in the circular corridor that connected her private chamber to her siblings. Above, the cavern roof vanished into shadow. At the heart of the ring, a vast web of cables rose into the dark like the roots and trunk of a colossal tree. The servers of Prosopon's core shimmered like stars among the branches, glowing filaments connecting them, limbs of the great machine in which the Guardian slept. Around her, the other domes. Livs, Astrids, Maels. Dark. Locked. She kept moving. Her boots struck the floor too loudly. Her breath caught in her throat. Red eyes flickered into being on the corridor walls. Glass, plastic, steel. Every surface stared at her. A sudden pulse of heat slammed into her skull. A warning flashed across her vision. Prosopon had launched an attack. It was hacking her. Sophie crashed into the curve of the wall, her vision warping. Colors bled. The floor wavered like liquid. She bit her lip until she tasted blood and forced a punch routine through her neural net, barely enough to ward off the attack. Another trio of eyes blinked open on the floor beside her. It's hunting me. She shoved away from the wall, breath sharp and ragged. The satchel slammed against her side as she ran. She didn't. couldn't look back. The corridor curved gently as she ran, following the ring counterclockwise toward the hall that would lead her to the rest of the facility. This path took her past half of the remaining 8 domes, each nearly identical to her own, smooth, transparent, lit with red. They were silent, whether they were empty or not. She passed Asgards, Svartalfheims, Niflheims, then Jotunheims. She kept her eyes forward. As she came to the door that divided the ring and their domes from the rest of Naustrand, Sophie dropped to a knee by the control panel. She frantically withdrew the cyberdeck from her bag. She connected her personal link to the deck, then the deck to the door panel with a second cable. The handheld deck synced with the one hidden in her arm. She used it as a shield against Prosopon as she rerouted the door's instructions and forced it open. As she stood, she caught a glimpse of Alfheim's dome, the next one she would have passed had she continued around the ring. The red strobes lit the interior of her sister's chamber, and for a split second, Sophie could see the faint outline of someone standing perfectly still within. Watching? Then, the figure was gone as Sophie resumed her mad dash. The door sealed shut behind her with a hiss that sounded too much like breath. Ahead, the central accessed corridor branched into 2 directions. One would take her past the laboratories, hydroponics, and machine shop. The other cut straight through the main Nexus hub toward the operations wing and the AV hangar. Sophie didn't hesitate. She steered toward the latter. The corridor was long, angular, a brutalist spine of reinforced steel and glass. Emergency strobes blinked every 10 meters, casting harsh shadows that jumped with every step she took. The cameras above were blind, at least for now. She'd disabled them as she opened the door, but she could feel the ghost of Prosopon's presence scraping along the edges of her neuroport, looking for a breach to exploit. Behind her, she heard the low whine of power surging through the conduits. Something charging, unfolding. A soft click echoed from behind her, followed by the unmistakable sound of tiny servos whirring to life. Drones. She didn't look. She didn't have to. Her internal system screamed with alert notifications. One of Prosopon's targeting demons was locking on. She felt it like ice in her blood, a tightening sensation behind her eyes as the digital grip closed around her connection ports. A burst of static punched through her HUD. A single line of black text crawled across her vision.
Stop. Return. Obey.
Sophie fired back a spike of scrambled code, but it fizzled before making contact. She'd expected this, but had to try. The demon was too advanced, no doubt customized to work against her specific loadout. The floor beneath her shuddered as a drone skittered out from a recessed wall panel up ahead. It was a sleek arachnid, limbs tipped with paralytic injectors. Its spherical body was dotted with lenses, glowing red eyes. She planted a foot hard into the floor and leapt over the spider, just avoiding one of the injectors as it raised its closest leg to strike at her. She scanned it mid-air, and by the time she landed, the drone was writhing as it short-circuited, her quick hack overloading its system. Her landing was awkward, but she kept her feet beneath her and surged onward down the hall. Panels in the floor slid open as she passed. 2 more spider drones skittered out and across the floor and wall as they pursued her. One caught her shoulder with a direct strike as it leapt at her. She staggered sideways into the wall, gritting her teeth. The reactive organic mesh had absorbed the force of the blow, dispersing it across its surface, but there was only so much it could do. Thankfully, the spider had not struck her with an injector needle. She kicked the drone that had hit her, launching it toward the second. They collided with a satisfying clang. As the drones struggled to untangle themselves from each other, she withdrew the pistol from her bag and pulled the trigger twice. The machines exploded in sparks and ceased to move. Sophie took off again, gritting her teeth against the growing headache blooming behind her temples. Prosopon was escalating. Her intrusion countermeasure electronics were degrading, beginning to fail. And deeper than the pain, beneath the layers of code, adrenaline, and training, was the chilling truth she couldn't push away. It was winning. She kept running, coming to the security junction between her and the operations center. A bulkhead door had closed off this entrance. The other would be barricaded in an identical manner. She would never be able to physically break through the door, but she didn't have to. An access panel was hidden behind a palm-sized plate in the face of the door. She took a calculated risk, leveling the pistol at the panel. She fired, punching a hole in it, and the force sent the plate flying. The bullet was embedded in the display, but the rest of the controls, most importantly the access port, were undamaged. She scrambled to the door, braced herself, and jacked in. This time, Prosopon's retaliation hit like a hammer. No finesse, no ice. Rage. The AI struck her with a blunt force hack that clamped down on her optics, blinding her with blooming white and static. Stark black text crawled through the interface.
You are mine.
Her fingers spasmed. Blood dripped from her nose. She screamed and forced a demon through the port. She had no time to gently pick the lock. No, this was the digital equivalent of a breaching charge. A buzzer sounded, and the door slid open so fast it yanked out the link cable, which hissed as it rewound into her handheld deck. The second deck was her saving grace. As she was forcibly jacked out, the small computer was finally overwhelmed. The overheating circuits burst into flames in her hand. She dropped the handheld, disconnecting herself quickly from the wrecked device, and wishing she wasn't picturing what would have happened to her skull without its barrier. Still reeling from the sensory overload, she stumbled over the threshold, trying not to vomit. Her head cleared after a few moments, but as soon as she rounded the next corner, she froze. Two more drones were searching for her. They were humanoid this time, each bearing the Emir Scanditech tree on their chest plates. They marched forward in sync, heads scanning with pinpoint sensors. Their arms were built for restraint, steel bracers, chemical injectors, EMP emitters woven throughout their forearms. Containment units. Between these and the spiders, it seemed she was meant to be caught, not killed. They hadn't seen her, yet, but they would. She had only seconds. Her vision swam, her cybernetics were creaking, pain radiated across the inside of her skull like the shards of 1,000 shattered mirrors. Prosopon wasn't just hunting her, it was taking her apart from the inside out to ensure it got its prize. She ducked back around the corner and stuffed the gun back into her bag. The monowire would be a more effective weapon against these bots, but she needed to do something about Prosopon rooting around in her skull before it was too late. Her fingers brushed the clasp of the silver case. Inside was a single data shard, a lone demon. She had never used it, not once, not in field ops, not in testing. She wasn't even sure it would work, but it might slow Prosopon down, might put it on the defensive and buy her the seconds she didn't have. Sophie's fingers trembled as she unlatched the case. Inside, a single shard etched with delicate silver lines, circuitry grown in fractals. A sleeping dragon curled inside. The dragon. She slotted the shard. The red lights seemed to slow and dim as the demon's shadow passed over her mind. She reached inward to where the dragon stirred. It was like touching a live wire. It pulsed with ancient, artificial menace. It was no mere tool, but a predator. With a silent command, she released it. The effect was immediate. She felt the demon spill into her systems, not just an extension of herself, but a force unto its own. It slid through her neural net with graceful violence, bypassing her firewalls and launching itself toward the source of the intrusion with zero hesitation. The pressure in her skull vanished. The static cleared. Prosopon reeled. It was evident in the way the automatons in the hall shuddered, and the lights flashed erratically. The dragon hadn't just countered the AI's incursion, it had bitten back and drawn blood. Sophie stood straighter, teeth clenched, heart hammering in her chest. There was no time to marvel, no time to reflect. The drones had begun to move again. She ripped the monowire free and stepped back around the corner. The cable hissed as she charged toward the drones, timing her movement between the pulsing red strobes. As the first drone turned toward her, arm raised to fire a disabling EMP burst, she ducked low and swept the monowire in a rising arc. The weapon sliced cleanly through the unit's elbow joint. Sparks flashed. The limb dropped. Before it could react, she twisted, using the momentum of her pivot to whip the monowire around the drone's torso. Metal shrieked as the bodies split open and its internal components spilled out like viscera. The second drone launched itself toward her. It was too fast. Sophie stumbled as it struck her in the chest. The impact drove her back against the wall. Pain lanced down her spine. Another strike. She felt the ROM suit stiffen around her stomach as it defended her from the jab of a needle hidden in the automaton's fist. The armor plates for the ROM suit were detached, resting in her locker, tantalizingly close but just out of reach. But this part of the suit was enough to defend her for now. She kicked the machine hard in the abdomen, stalling it and giving her just enough space to strike back. The monowire flashed, coiling around the machine's head and scattering its pieces across the floor. She kicked the robot again, knocking it to the ground before she struck once more and severed the rest of the body in two. She collapsed to her knees for a moment, trying to catch her breath. It came in ragged gasps, but the hallway was otherwise quiet, and for the moment, Prosopon was absent. The dragon coiled deep in her mind like a dark ember. Its hunger was sated for now, but it was still active. She could feel it curling against her thoughts like a second pulse. She retracted the monowire and stood, ready to press on. Her limbs ached, her head buzzed, but she was still standing. The hangar wasn't far now. She was almost free. Sophie limped down the corridor, every muscle burning, breath ragged and hot in her throat. Every flickering light overhead felt like a countdown. Every footfall echoed like it might wake something in the darkness. She passed through the empty locker room, taking a moment to pull her locker open and retrieve the armor plates that comprised the rest of her ROM suit. She stuffed them into her bag and withdrew the pistol. The hangar was next. The door that led out into the cavern was just outside the locker room. She pushed it open and was instantly confronted with the cold of outside air. The cavern was just as cold as the mountain it was carved from. The air temperature was perfect for cooling the astronomical heat generated within the tree-like network of computers that formed Prosopon's artificial brain. The yawning gate loomed ahead, massive steel doors that camouflaged the facility and stranded Ursa's children on the corpse shore. Two sleek aerodynes stood idle beneath the shining branches of Prosopon high above, their matte shells rimed with frost, engines asleep. Sophie's breath turned silver as she approached the nearer of the two. It was the lighter model, designed for maneuverability and speed, but it was unarmored. It would be easier to escape with, fast enough to cross the yawning gate before Prosopon regained control of it. At least she hoped it would be. The door of the aerodyne opened automatically as she approached. The interior lights flickered to life. She stepped inside the vehicle and accessed the control panel inside. She jacked into the access port, hoping that the loss of the shield her external cyberdeck had provided wouldn't spell out her doom. The system pushed back immediately, but it didn't overwhelm her. The ice was thick, wrapped in familiar strands of Emir code. She gritted her teeth and let her demon do the work. The dragon uncoiled with a thought. It surged forward and began to shred the AV's defenses. Her fingers twitched against the metal. They were beginning to lock up under the strain and cold. All she needed was a few more seconds. Behind her, movement. A footfall, light, organic. Sophie's heart sank. Reflex turned her halfway around, pistol raised. It was Mael. He stood frozen in the threshold of the hangar and the rest of the facility, one hand braced on the frame of the door. The red emergency lighting caught the edges of his silhouette, casting long shadows into the hangar. He looked as though he had sprinted the length of the compound, chest rising and falling, each breath visible in the cold air. Sophie didn't lower her gun. She didn't speak, didn't move. Neither did he. The dragon roared as it finished its work and the AV systems opened to her. The interface flickered with green light behind her. It was ready. Sophie's arm dropped slowly, the pistol lowering to her side as she turned back toward the cockpit. She looked back once to see what he would do. Behind her, Mael didn't move, didn't follow. He watched her slip into the pilot's seat and disappear behind the door hatch as it closed, sealing with a hiss of pressurized finality. The engines ignited with a deep, rising whine. Heat rippled across the landing pad, melting patches of frost from the floor. Sophie guided the AV toward the yawning gate as she gave the dragon another command. It flew through her link, through the AV's computer, and the connection to the gate controls. Sophie saw the lights of Prosopon's tree flash as the dragon made contact, and wrested control of the door from the AI. The AV rose through the cavern mouth as the steel jaws of the yawning gate slid apart to reveal the pale white of the sky beyond. Mael stood alone as the craft vanished into the cold. Then the gate sealed behind her. Prosopon's scream could be felt even as Sophie's connection to the Emir Scandatech and Naustran networks was shattered. The rage of that outburst reverberated through her skull, nearly causing her to double over in her seat. She clenched her teeth and forced her way through the pain. Static crackled across her vision, then cleared. The sky opened in front of her, a flat gray void framed by snow-capped peaks. She angled the aerodyne down toward the white expanse beyond the yawning gate, fingers tight on the controls. Cold wind howled outside as she sped through the sky, engines roaring. For the first time in her life, she was flying free. And then, impact. No warning, no lock-on alert, just a sudden lurch. Something ripped through the stabilizers, jerking the vehicle hard to the left. A sudden forward pitch slammed Sophie against her harness. Her vision bloomed red at the edges. The controls failed. The screens went blank. The white ground rushed up to meet her. Everything turned sideways. Glass shattered. Metal shrieked. Snow swallowed the world.